Good afternoon. So, my sister Kathy told me that I should put this down to paper. And this is a picture of our part of our family tree that shows on one hand the Farrell side, and this shows the Harrington side of our family. Now, I've been kind of looking at this thing for 20 years, and it continues to amaze me about all of the relationships that are built into this family tree that people don't know about. For example, my grandfather, Howard Farrell, right here, and this is my dad, and this is Jerry, me, knew he was related to Farrells around town, but they didn't know how. We also knew that my dad and my mom were somehow related, but we weren't too sure really about the details of that. One of the things that I did was I put together another version of that where I did a more simplified version of it. But what I did was, just for the sake of helping us see these relationships, is I put certain names next to these people. And then what I did was threw out that Elizabeth Harrington, who is in this particular sheet right here, we're just, for the sake of trying to figure out what's going on, imagining her as Maureen, my sister. Now, my sister Maureen has a brother, Tim, and let's just, for the sake of understanding something complicated, think of Elizabeth Harrington as Maureen, and she has a brother, Cornelius Harrington, who I am saying is Tim, because they're obviously brothers and sisters. Tim, on the Harrington side, which is on my mom's side, married Elizabeth Gahan as if it was Val. They had a son, Doug. Well, Maureen married Bjorn, who is John H. Farrell, and they had a son who is Connor, the equivalent of Jerome W. Now, this is where it kind of gets interesting. Doug over here, who is John Harrington, is actually Connor Marinder's cousin, which we know they're cousins, okay? Maureen and Tim are brother and sister, but these guys are cousins. So when I look at this, it's partly showing, this is the first version of my sharing of this information, that Doug, John Harrington, had a daughter, Beatrice Harrington, who is Grandma Murray, and Grandma Murray had a daughter who is Mom, Marlon Murray, and Marlon and Dad had me. Well, that's what it looks like on the Harrington side. But on the Farrell side, John H. Farrell, which is Bjorn, had Jerome W. Farrell, who was my great-grandfather, and he had Howard, who had my dad, and then had me. One of the things that's interesting is that Marlon Murray and Jerome Farrell got married. That was the second marriage, actually, in the Farrell-Harrington line. What's kind of interesting is that Doug's granddaughter, Mom, or John Harrington's granddaughter, and Connor, or Jerome W.'s grandson, married. That's, if I tell you that, where's that other sheet I just had there? If I tell you that on this more complicated sheet that Mom married Dad, we can get all kinds of crazy in some of the other videos about, well, this is the first cousin, this is the first cousin once removed, this is the second and third cousins once removed. But I thought it might be better to start it out with a simple illustration that John Harrington, on the Harrington side, had a cousin, Connor Marinder. And John Harrington had a cousin who was Jerome W. Farrell. So my mom's grandfather married my dad's, excuse me, let me just say it the other way. Mom had a grandfather and dad had a grandfather who were cousins. Said another way, Doug or John Harrington had a granddaughter and Jerome W. had a grandson, and they got married. There's a lot of other things to say, but something that's kind of interesting is that Elizabeth Harrington married John H. Farrell, which is Marion Beach, and they had 12 children. Elizabeth Harrington's brother, Cornelius Harrington, married Elizabeth Gahan, which is kind of like Tim and Val. And one record says they had 15 kids. They had minimally 8 children. So simply Cornelius and Elizabeth, just 2 of 12 children, had between 20 and 27 kids. These are going to be in the Golden Wedding, which we're going to show you in a different video. But what I'm really doing here is just trying to work out and show you some of what this looks like when we add things like arrows and clarity. And when I first did this, I was like, okay, that's fascinating, but very few people could really follow that. This is something that for anybody that's interested, they could go back and forth a couple of times. Maureen had a son, Connor. Elizabeth Harrington had a son, Jerome W. Elizabeth Harrington had a grandson, Howard, okay? And Elizabeth Harrington had a great-grandson, my dad. And the same person over here had a nephew, Doug, and had a great-nephew, Grandma. And it gets a little less crazy when you think of Elizabeth Harrington had a brother who had a grandson, a granddaughter, Beatrice, and had a great-granddaughter, Marlon. And I am Cornelius Harrington's great-great-grandson. But what's kind of interesting is I'm Cornelius Harrington's great-great-grandson, but I'm also Elizabeth Harrington's great-great-grandson. And that makes sense because they were brother and sister. Again, you might have to go over that a couple of times. But these two people are, because they were brother and sister, are what give us two connections in our family tree. I am in the family tree as a Farrell, but I'm also in the family tree as a Harrington. And the relationships are more complicated than just, oh, this is my grandfather, because he's also my second cousin twice removed. And we're going to go over that in a subsequent video like this, where we look at Howard and John Harrington were first cousins, and Dad and Grandma Harrington were second cousins. And then lastly, Mom and Dad and Mom were third cousins. So I'm actually a third cousin once removed to my mom on this particular side, and I'm a fourth cousin to myself right here, which is wild. So let's just start that out as the first confusing video that kind of throws out those relationships to anybody that might be interested. And what I'm going to do is just kind of look at it in a simpler sense with other charts. What I also did, which you might or might not find interesting, is I said current observations from studying this tree. First observation is that understanding our relationship with our family tree is complicated and made infinitely more interesting by the fact that our ancestors were intermarried. Said another way, some of the people that got married back in Dewshore, Pennsylvania were related. For example, Cornelius Harrington, right here. No, Cornelius Harrington and Elizabeth Harrington were brother and sister. This kind of doesn't immediately mean anything until you think about it as Tim as Cornelius Harrington and Maureen as Elizabeth Harrington, as we know, are brother and sister. Now, while viewing this chart, it can get pretty confusing and complex. Maureen, who is in the chart, and I'm aligning her, as I told you earlier, with Elizabeth Harrington, married Bjorn, and they had Connor. This is the equivalent of Elizabeth Harrington marrying John H. Farrell, and they had Jerome W. But when you think of it as Maureen Bjorn had Connor, you start to get a real more current view of what their relationship is. Tim, on the other hand, for illustration purposes and learning purposes, I'm kind of aligning with Cornelius Harrington's name, married Val, but they had a child, John Harrington, which is the equivalent of Doug. And as we know, Doug and Connor are cousins, which means John Harrington and Jerome W. Farrell were also first cousins. This is where it starts to get interesting. My mom, which would be Doug's granddaughter right there, married Connor, or Jerome W. Farrell's grandson, which is Dad. This is both weird and cool at the same time, and I've been contemplating that for a long time. Because of the marriage of relations in our family tree, or the marriage of cousins, this down the line gets super crazy interesting because everybody in the line can be viewed as a Farrell. We all have Farrell aspects to us, and we have Harrington aspects to us. Everybody has more than just the kind of relationships that come from a normal marriage, in that everybody has a cousin, or a cousin once removed, or an uncle when viewed as a Farrell or as a Harrington, both of which are true. Depending on how you look at things, a grandson now depends on whether you are looking at that person as a Farrell or whether you're looking at that person as a Harrington. You will see that I am on both sides of the thing, which is kind of interesting. But when you look that I'm also related to my brother and my sister, that introduces some crazy words, and really is what I'm trying to do here, is show this in a video. Another observation in this first video is that Mom and Dad were third cousins. Grandpa Murray and Grandpa Farrell were second cousins. Oddly, I am a fourth cousin to myself. So every cousin who's out there looking at this video, who is a son or a daughter of this line, is really a fifth cousin to yourself. And we will look further into that in subsequent videos. So Kathy told me that we kind of have to get that out there. I would like to go over this, but it's too complicated. So in this first video, I'm going to spend a few minutes just doing it with this. We'll put it on YouTube. Maybe we'll get some links. Feel free to send me any questions to my cell, which is 607-237-8127. And let's see if we can generate some questions and maybe go to the next level in the next video. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.